My son posted a photo from his daughter's first birthday party. The cake, the balloons, the happy family. I lived 20 minutes away and hadn't been invited. That's when I knew I'd lost him forever. I'd been scrolling through social media on a Sunday morning when I'd seen the post. My son Eduardo, his wife Natalie, and their daughter Isabella surrounded by what looked like 30 guests at a backyard party. The caption read, "Our princess turns 1. So grateful for all the family and friends who made this day special." I'd stared at that photo for 10 minutes, zooming in on the faces of people I didn't recognize. Natalie's family was there, her parents, her siblings, what looked like cousins, and aunts and uncles. Eduardo's coworkers, friends from their church, even their neighbor who I'd met once, was in the background holding a plate of cake. But I wasn't there. Teresa Rivera, Eduardo's mother, the woman who'd given birth to him, who'd raised him alone after his father walked out when Eduardo was 3, who'd worked as a seamstress for 40 years to pay for his education. I hadn't been invited to my only grandchild's first birthday party. I'd called Eduardo immediately, my hand shaking as I'd held the phone. "Mijo, I saw the photos from Isabella's party." "Oh, yeah. It was a nice day. I didn't know about it." There'd been a long pause. I could hear Natalie saying something in the background, her voice sharp even though I couldn't make out the words. "Mom, we kept it really small. Just close family." "I'm your mother. How much closer can family get? It was last minute. We didn't want to bother you." "Bother me? Eduardo, she's my granddaughter. I would have driven through a hurricane to be there." "Look, Natalie handles the party planning. Maybe she thought you were busy." "Did you tell her to invite me?" Another pause. I might have forgotten to mention it. That sentence had hit me harder than any insult. He'd forgotten to mention me. His mother had become so irrelevant in his life that inviting me to his daughter's first birthday simply hadn't crossed his mind. "Eduardo, what's happening? Why are you pushing me away?" "I'm not pushing you away, Mom. We're just busy with the baby and work and everything. It's not personal." "It feels very personal." Natalie had taken the phone then. "Teresa, Eduardo is right. We're just overwhelmed with parenting and didn't think to include extended family in the party." "Extended family? I'm his mother." "I mean family beyond the nuclear unit. We're trying to set boundaries about who gets access to our daughter and when." "Access? She's my granddaughter. And we'll arrange visits when it makes sense for our schedule. But we can't accommodate everyone who wants to see her." She'd hung up before I could respond. I'd sat in my living room in Tucson, staring at that party photo, trying to understand when I'd become someone who needed to be accommodated instead of someone who was automatically included. The visit I made to their house the next day would reveal how deep the exclusion went. I'd driven to Phoenix unannounced, something I'd never done before, but I needed to see Eduardo face to face to understand what was happening to our relationship. Their house was in one of those new developments where all the homes looked similar, neat lawns and 2-car garages. Eduardo had answered the door in sweatpants and a t-shirt, surprise flashing across his face when he'd seen me. "Mom, what are you doing here? We need to talk." "Now's not a great time." "It never seems to be a great time." "Eduardo, when was the last time you called me?" 2 months ago. "I've been busy. Too busy to call your mother. Too busy to invite me to my granddaughter's birthday." Natalie had appeared behind him, holding Isabella on her hip. The baby had looked at me with curious eyes, and my heart had ached because I barely knew this child who carried my blood. "Teresa, you can't just show up without calling first. We have a schedule with Isabella." I wanted to talk to my son. "Eduardo, tell your mother we need advance notice for visits." The way she'd said your mother had been clinical, distant, like I was an obligation rather than family. Eduardo had looked uncomfortable, caught between his wife and his mother in a way that made it clear he'd already chosen sides. "Mom, Natalie's right. You should have called first. Would you have let me come if I'd called?" His silence had been answer enough. "Can I at least hold my granddaughter?" Natalie had tightened her grip on Isabella. "She's due for a nap soon. Maybe another time." "Another time when?" When you decide I'm allowed to see her? Teresa, you're being dramatic. We're not keeping her from you. We're just managing her schedule and her exposure to people. Exposure? I'm not a disease. I'm her grandmother. Eduardo had stepped forward, positioning himself between Natalie and me. Mom, you need to calm down. I am calm. I'm just trying to understand why I'm being treated like a stranger. Nobody's treating you like a stranger, but you do need to respect our boundaries as parents. What boundaries? You never told me about any boundaries. You just stopped including me in your lives. Isabella had started crying, probably sensing the tension. Natalie had bounced her gently, shooting me a look that clearly blamed me for upsetting the baby. Eduardo, your mother needs to leave. She's disrupting Isabella's routine. I haven't even been here 10 minutes. And in those 10 minutes, you've made everyone uncomfortable. That's not healthy for our daughter. Eduardo had gently taken my arm, guiding me toward the door. Mom, maybe we can plan something for next month. A proper visit where everyone's prepared. Next month? Eduardo, I'm your mother. I shouldn't need an appointment to see you. I'll call you later this week. But he hadn't called. A week had passed, then 2, then 3. I'd called him repeatedly, but he'd only answered twice, and both times he'd claimed to be busy and promised to call back later. He never had. What I discovered from my friend Mandy explained everything. Mandy Rodriguez lived in the same Phoenix neighborhood as Eduardo and Natalie. We'd been friends for 30 years, ever since we'd worked together at the same garment factory. She'd called me one evening about 5 weeks after the birthday party incident. Teresa, I need to tell you something you're not going to want to hear. What is it? I saw Eduardo and Natalie at the grocery store yesterday. They were with Isabella and Natalie's mother. Okay? Teresa, Natalie's mother was holding Isabella and calling herself Grandma, and Eduardo didn't correct her. My chest had tightened. Maybe she meant she's the other grandmother. That's not how it sounded. It sounded like she's the only grandmother. And Teresa, there's more. Tell me. I asked Eduardo how you were doing, and he looked uncomfortable. Natalie answered for him. She said you were struggling with boundaries, and that they were taking space from you. She said what? She made it sound like you were the problem, like you'd done something wrong, and they needed distance from you. I haven't done anything wrong, Mandy. I just wanted to be part of my granddaughter's life. I know, Mika, but I think you need to understand what you're dealing with. Natalie is cutting you out and Eduardo is letting her do it. After hanging up with Mandy, I'd driven to Phoenix again. This time I'd parked across the street from Eduardo's house and waited. At 3 in the afternoon, a car had pulled into their driveway. Natalie's parents had gotten out, along with what looked like her sister and brother. I'd watched them enter the house carrying wrapped gifts. 45 minutes later, they'd all come out to the backyard, which I could partially see from my parking spot. They'd set up what looked like a casual family barbecue. Isabella was there, being passed between relatives. Eduardo was manning the grill. Natalie was laughing with her sister. It was a perfect family scene, except I wasn't in it. I'd sat in my car for 2 hours, watching my son build a family that didn't include me. When Natalie's family finally left, I'd driven home to Tucson crying so hard I'd had to pull over twice because I couldn't see the road. The letter I wrote to Eduardo that night was the hardest thing I'd ever put on paper. Dear Eduardo, I've spent the past week trying to understand what I did wrong. Why am I excluded from your life while Natalie's family is welcomed weekly? Why wasn't I invited to Isabella's first birthday party? Why do I need permission to visit my own son? I've replayed every interaction we've had over the past 2 years, looking for the moment I overstepped or offended, but I can't find it. I was respectful when you announced the pregnancy. I offered to help, but never demanded. I gave you space when you said you were overwhelmed. What I didn't do was disappear. I didn't stop being your mother. I didn't stop caring about you or wanting to know my granddaughter. If I've done something to hurt you, please tell me. I can't apologize for mistakes I don't understand, but if I haven't done anything wrong, then I need you to explain why Natalie's family gets to see Isabella regularly while I'm told I need to schedule visits that never actually happen. I love you, Eduardo. I always will. But I can't keep begging for scraps of attention while watching you give Natalie's family everything I'm asking for. Your mother, Teresa. I'd mailed the letter and waited for a response. Days passed. Then weeks. Finally, 6 weeks after I'd mailed it, Eduardo had called. Mom, I got your letter. And I think you're overreacting to normal boundaries that new parents set. Eduardo, Natalie's family doesn't have these boundaries. Only I do. That's because they live closer and are more involved in our daily lives. They live 15 minutes away. I live 25 minutes away. That's not a significant difference. It's not just about distance, Mom. Then what is it about? He'd been quiet for a long time. Natalie doesn't feel comfortable with you. The words had felt like a physical blow. What do you mean she doesn't feel comfortable with me? She says you're judgmental, that you make comments about her parenting and our lifestyle. What comments? Eduardo, I've barely seen you in the past year. When would I have made these palms? She says you criticized how she was dressing, Isabella, when you visited the hospital after the birth. I tried to remember that hospital visit. I'd been so careful to be supportive, to not overstep. I said Isabella's outfit was cute, but looked a little big. That's not criticism, that's an observation. To you, it was an observation. To Natalie, it felt like criticism. So I'm being excluded from my granddaughter's life because I noticed her outfit was too big. It's not just that. Natalie says you have a pattern of making her feel inadequate as a mother. Give me one other example. You asked if Isabella was sleeping through the night. That's a normal question. Every parent asks that. Natalie felt like you were implying she wasn't handling Isabella's sleep schedule properly. Eduardo, do you hear how ridiculous this sounds? I'm being shut out because of normal grandmother questions? They're not normal to Natalie. She's sensitive about her parenting. So I have to walk on eggshells and never ask about my granddaughter. You have to respect that Natalie is Isabella's mother and gets to decide who has access to her. And she's decided I don't get access. She's decided that we need space from family members who make her feel judged. His next words would reveal that this had been planned from the beginning. Mom, Natalie and I talked about this before. Isabella was born. We agreed that we wanted to limit grandparent involvement to avoid conflicts and confusion. You talked about limiting my involvement specifically. We talked about limiting all grandparents equally. But Natalie's parents are at your house constantly. Mandy saw them. I saw them. They're not limited. Eduardo had sighed, clearly frustrated at being caught in his lie. Natalie's parents respect boundaries better than you do. What boundaries have I violated? Name one specific thing I've done that crossed a line. You showed up unannounced at our house. After you stopped returning my calls and excluded me from a birthday party. See? This is the problem. You don't respect our autonomy as parents. I respect your autonomy. I just want to be part of my granddaughter's life. On your terms, not ours. What are your terms, Eduardo? Because from where I'm sitting, your only term is that I disappear. That's not fair. Isn't it? When was the last time you invited me to anything? When was the last time you called just to talk? When was the last time you acted like you wanted me in your life? He'd been silent, and I'd known I'd hit the truth. He didn't want to acknowledge. Eduardo, Natalie is cutting me out, and you're letting her do it. You're choosing her comfort over your own mother. She's my wife. Of course I'm choosing her. You can choose both. You can have a wife and a mother in your life. Not if my mother makes my wife uncomfortable. I make her uncomfortable by existing, apparently, by asking normal questions and wanting to see my grandchild. Mom, I can't do this anymore. This conversation is exactly why we need distance. Distance? Eduardo, you've created an ocean between us. Maybe we need an ocean right now. He'd hung up, and I'd sat holding the phone, realizing that my son had just told me he needed an ocean of distance from his own mother. The boy I'd raised, the young man I'd supported through college, the son I'd loved unconditionally. He wanted nothing to do with me. What happened over the next 6 months made me understand I'd lost him completely. Eduardo had blocked my number. I discovered this when I'd tried to call him and received a message saying the call couldn't be completed. When I texted from a different number asking why he'd blocked me, he'd responded, "We need space. Please respect that." I tried to contact him through social media, but he'd blocked me there too. His Facebook page, where he regularly posted photos of Isabella and updates about their lives, was completely inaccessible to me. I'd sent letters to his house. Some came back marked return to sender. Others simply vanished, and I never knew if he'd received them or if Natalie had thrown them away unopened. For Isabella's second birthday, I mailed a card with a check for $100. The check was never cashed. The card was returned to me 3 weeks later with "not accepted" written across the envelope in handwriting I didn't recognize. Mandy had continued to update me occasionally. She'd see Eduardo and Natalie around the neighborhood, always with Natalie's family, always seeming happy. Isabella was growing up surrounded by her maternal grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins. She was growing up not knowing I existed. "Teresa, I don't think he's going to come around," Mandy had said during one of our phone calls. "I think Natalie has him completely convinced that cutting you out was the right thing to do." How does a son just erase his mother? By believing his wife when she says his mother is toxic, even when it's not true. What did I do that was so toxic, Mandy? I loved him. I wanted to know my granddaughter. Are those toxic behaviors? No, Miga. But some daughters-in-law see any mother-in-law as competition. And if the son doesn't have a strong enough spine to stand up for his mother, the mother loses. I'd lost. I'd spent months accepting this reality, mourning the loss of my son and granddaughter like they'd died, because in a way they had. The Eduardo I'd known was gone, replaced by a man who could block his mother's number without apparent guilt. Then, 2 years after the birthday party exclusion, everything changed. Mandy had called me early on a Tuesday morning, her voice urgent. "Teresa, you need to come to Phoenix. Now." What happened? Eduardo is in the hospital. There was a car accident. My hands had started shaking. How bad? Bad enough that they called his emergency contacts. "Teresa, Natalie is there with her family, but Eduardo has been asking for you." He's been asking for me, according to the nurse I spoke with. Yes, he keeps saying he needs to talk to his mother. I'd driven to Phoenix faster than I should have, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios. The hospital had been a maze of corridors and waiting rooms, but I'd finally found the ICU where Eduardo was being treated. Natalie had been in the waiting room with her parents and sister. When she'd seen me, her expression had hardened. "What are you doing here?" "My son is in the hospital. Where else would I be?" "You're not on his contact list anymore." The nurse said, "He's been asking for me." Natalie had stood up, blocking my path. "He's confused from the pain medication. He doesn't actually want to see you. Let me talk to him and find out." "No, you're not welcome here." Natalie's father had stood up too, a large man who seemed to think his physical presence would intimidate me. "You heard her. Leave." "I'm not leaving until I see my son." A nurse had emerged from Eduardo's room then, looking at all of us with concern. "Are you Teresa Rivera?" "Yes. Eduardo has been asking for you repeatedly. He's quite agitated. It might help if you could see him briefly." Natalie had started to protest, but the nurse had cut her off. "I'm sorry, but my priority is the patient's well-being. If seeing his mother will calm him down, that's what needs to happen." I'd followed the nurse into Eduardo's room, my heart breaking at the sight of him. He'd been bruised and bandaged, connected to machines and IVs, looking so young and vulnerable despite being 33 years old. "Mija?" His eyes had opened, focusing on me with effort. "Mom, I'm here. I'm sorry. For everything. I'm so sorry." "Don't worry about that now. Just focus on getting better. I was wrong. About Natalie. About you. About everything." "Eduardo, we can talk about this later. You need to rest." "No." He'd grabbed my hand with surprising strength. "I need to say this now. Natalie lied about you. She made me think you were judgmental and controlling. But you weren't. You were just being a mother. Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I almost died." The car flipped 3 times. "And when I thought I was dying, All I could think about was how I'd treated you, how I'd let Natalie push you away, how I'd blocked your number and returned your cards like you were nothing. Tears had been streaming down my face. I love you, Eduardo. I've always loved you. I know. And I've been a terrible son. Can you forgive me? There's nothing to forgive. You're alive. That's all that matters. But Natalie wasn't done fighting. When I'd left Eduardo's room, Natalie had been waiting in the hallway with her family. Her face had been cold with anger. What did you say to him? Nothing. He talked. I listened. He's confused from the medication. Whatever he said doesn't count. He seemed pretty clear to me. You're not going to use this accident to manipulate your way back into our lives. I'm not manipulating anyone. I'm just here for my son. Natalie's mother had stepped forward, her voice sharp. You need to understand something, Teresa. Eduardo and Natalie have built a life that doesn't include you. This accident doesn't change that. Actually, it does change it. Eduardo asked for me. He apologized for pushing me away. He acknowledged that you lied about me. Natalie had gone pale. He didn't say that. He did. He said you made him think I was judgmental and controlling when I wasn't. He said you lied. He's confused. He's not confused. He's seeing clearly for the first time in 2 years. I'd walked past them before they could respond, heading back to Eduardo's room. A doctor had been checking his vitals, and I'd waited in the hallway until the examination was finished. Are you family? The doctor had asked when he'd emerged. I'm his mother. Good. He's going to need support during recovery. He has a fractured pelvis, broken ribs, a concussion. He'll be hospitalized for at least a week. Then we'll need several months of physical therapy. I'll be here. His wife mentioned they have a young daughter. Is there family support for child care? His wife's family will help with that. What about you? Will you be involved in his recovery? If he wants me to be. Yes. Eduardo wanted me to be. Over the following week, I'd spent every day at the hospital. Natalie had tried to limit my visiting hours, claiming Eduardo needed rest, but Eduardo had overruled her, telling the nurses that his mother was welcome any time. The tension had been thick during the hours when both Natalie and I had been in the room. She'd barely spoken to me, communicating through Eduardo even when I was sitting right there. On the 4th day, Eduardo had asked to speak with Natalie privately. I'd left the room and waited in the hospital cafeteria, drinking coffee and wondering what they were discussing. 45 minutes later, Eduardo had texted me asking me to come back to his room. When I'd arrived, Natalie was gone. Eduardo had looked exhausted but determined. I told Natalie that I want you back in our lives. In Isabella's life. How did she react? She's angry. She says if I let you back in, she'll never forgive me. Eduardo, I don't want to cause problems in your marriage. My marriage already has problems. I just didn't want to see them before the accident. What do you mean? Natalie has been controlling who I see, who I talk to, how I spend my time. She's isolated me from everyone except her family. I thought that was normal, but it's not. What are you going to do? I'm going to stand up to her. And if she can't accept that my mother is part of my life, then we'll have to work that out in counseling. The months that followed tested everyone's limit. Eduardo had been released from the hospital with strict instructions for bed rest and physical therapy. He'd needed help with basic activities, and Natalie had been overwhelmed caring for both him and Isabella while working full-time. I'd offered to help, and after initial resistance, Natalie had reluctantly agreed. I'd started coming to their house 3 times a week to assist with Eduardo's care and to watch Isabella while Natalie worked. Those first few weeks had been tense. Natalie had barely spoken to me, communicating through Eduardo or leaving written instructions on the kitchen counter. But gradually, as she'd seen that I wasn't there to judge or criticize, just to help, her hostility had softened slightly. Isabella had been wary of me at first. At 2 years old, she had no memory of me, and I was just a stranger who showed up at her house. But children are resilient and accepting. Within a month, she'd started warming to me, letting me read her stories and eventually climbing into my lap for cuddles. The first time Isabella had called me abuela, Natalie had been in the room. She'd stiffened, and I'd seen her jaw tighten. but she hadn't corrected Isabella or told her to call me something else. Eduardo's recovery had been slow. He'd needed months of physical therapy to walk without a cane. During that time, I'd seen the dynamics of his marriage more clearly. Natalie was controlling in ways I hadn't noticed before. She'd made decisions without consulting him. She'd dismissed his opinions. She'd treated him more like a child to manage than a partner to respect. "Mom, I think I need to go to marriage counseling," Eduardo had told me one afternoon, while Natalie was at work. "That might be a good idea. Natalie won't want to. She thinks our marriage is fine, except for your involvement. Then you need to make it clear that the marriage has issues beyond your mother." Eduardo had started individual therapy first, working through the accident trauma and his relationship patterns. Slowly, he'd begun to see how Natalie had manipulated him into cutting me out, how she'd used his desire to be a good husband against him. 6 months after the accident, Eduardo made a decision that changed everything. "Mom, Natalie and I are separating." I'd been folding laundry in Eduardo's living room when he told me. My hands had stilled on a tiny shirt that belonged to Isabella. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure. She refuses to go to counseling. She refuses to acknowledge that she's been controlling. She told me yesterday that if I don't cut you out of my life again, she'll file for divorce." "Eduardo, I don't want to be the reason your marriage ends." "You're not the reason. You're just the excuse she's using. The real reason is that she wants total control, and she can't have that if I have any relationships outside her family." "What about Isabella?" "We'll work out custody." "But Mom, I'm not going to raise my daughter to think it's normal to cut people out of your life just because your spouse demands it." The divorce had been bitter. Natalie had fought for primary custody, claiming Eduardo was unstable and that my manipulation had caused their marriage to fail. But the court had seen through her claims, especially when Eduardo's therapist had testified about the unhealthy dynamics in the marriage. They'd ended up with joint custody, alternating weeks with Isabella. And when Isabella was with Eduardo, I was welcome to visit as much as I wanted. 3 years after that birthday party photo, I finally got to attend one of Isabella's parties. Isabella's 5th birthday party was at a park in Phoenix. Eduardo had invited both families, trying to be fair despite the divorce. Natalie's family had stayed on one side of the park, and I'd stayed on the other, and Isabella had moved between both groups without seeming to notice the tension. When it came time to cut the cake, Eduardo had called both grandmothers forward. "Isabella, you're lucky to have 2 abuelas who love you." Natalie's mother had smiled tightly, clearly uncomfortable sharing the spotlight. I'd simply been grateful to be there, to be recognized, to be part of this moment I'd thought I'd lost forever. Isabella had blown out her candles, and everyone had sung. When she'd been opening presents, she'd come to the one from me, a doll she'd mentioned wanting during one of our afternoon visits. "Abuela, thank you." She'd hugged me, her small arms tight around my neck, and I'd had to blink back tears. Natalie had watched this interaction with an expression I couldn't read. Later, as the party had been winding down, she'd approached me. "Teresa, can we talk?" Of course. We'd walked to a quieter area of the park, away from the remaining guests. Natalie had looked uncomfortable, her arms crossed defensively. "I owe you an apology." "You don't have to." "Yes, I do. I treated you terribly. I convinced Eduardo to cut you out of his life because I felt threatened by you. I thought you'd judge my parenting and try to take over with Isabella, but that's not who you are. I created a problem that didn't exist." "Thank you for saying that. I can't undo the years I kept you away from Eduardo and Isabella, but I want you to know that I'm working on myself in therapy. I'm trying to understand why I needed to control everything and everyone. I appreciate you telling me this, Natalie. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I just wanted you to know that I know what I did was wrong." Today, 5 years after that first birthday party photo, my relationship with Eduardo is stronger than ever. Eduardo and I have dinner every week. He calls me regularly just to talk. He includes me in decisions about Isabella's education and activities. He's rebuilt the relationship I thought was lost forever. Isabella knows me as Abuela Teresa, And she loves me without the complications her parents brought to our relationship. She stays with me sometimes on weekends, and we bake cookies and watch Disney movies and have the kind of simple, loving relationship grandmothers and granddaughters should have. Natalie and I will never be close, but we're civil at school events and birthday parties. We coexist for Isabella's sake, which is more than I'd hoped for during those dark months when Eduardo had blocked my number. But the scars remain. I still feel a spike of anxiety when Eduardo doesn't answer my calls promptly. I still have nightmares about being excluded from family events. I still remember that first birthday party photo and the pain of realizing I'd been erased. Eduardo apologized many times, and I've told him I forgive him. But forgiveness doesn't erase memory. I remember how easily he cut me out when Natalie demanded it. I remember how he blocked my number and returned my cards. I remember how he chose his wife's comfort over his mother's heart. Some people say I should just be grateful he came back, that I should focus on the present relationship rather than dwelling on the past. Maybe they're right, but I think there's value in remembering, in acknowledging that betrayal doesn't disappear just because someone apologizes, in recognizing that relationships can be rebuilt while still bearing the marks of what broke them. Eduardo almost destroyed our relationship. If not for that car accident, he might never have seen how Natalie had manipulated him. I might have spent the rest of my life as a blocked number, a grandmother erased from her granddaughter's life. That reality terrifies me more than almost anything else. The idea that my son could have kept me excluded forever, that I could have died never knowing Isabella, never being recognized as family. But it didn't happen that way. Eduardo woke up, both literally in that hospital and figuratively to what his marriage had become, and he made the hard choice to rebuild what he'd broken. That choice matters. It doesn't erase the pain of those years, but it matters. As I finish writing this, I can see Eduardo's car pulling into my driveway. He's bringing Isabella for our weekly overnight visit. She'll burst through my door with stories about kindergarten and requests for specific cookie. Eduardo will stay for coffee, and we'll talk about everything and nothing. To an outsider, we'd look like any normal family, grandmother's son, granddaughter spending time together. But underneath is a foundation rebuilt after devastating collapse. Every phone call, every dinner, every birthday party I'm actually invited to. These things aren't automatic anymore. They're choices Eduardo makes to honor the relationship he almost destroyed. And that's okay. Maybe relationships that survive betrayal and rebuild are actually stronger than ones that never faced crisis. Maybe the fact that we're choosing each other now, rather than assuming we'll always be connected, makes the connection more valuable. Or maybe I'm just grateful for what I have and trying not to think too much about what I almost lost forever. Either way, Eduardo is here now. Isabella calls me abuela. I'm included in the family I was once erased from. That's not a perfect ending, but it's a real one. And sometimes real is better than perfect.